A policy wonk who's worked in city government for years, from Chicago Public Schools to the city of Gary, Indiana, Jocelyn Hare's aiming to unseat 5th Ward Alderman Leslie Hairston in Hyde Park and Woodlawn. I'm Mike Fouché, publisher of Aldertrack, and this is our Meet a Chicago Candidate series. So tell me, Jocelyn, what drove you to run for alderman?
It probably started about 10 years ago or so. I was working for CPS, and working for CPS was an incredible experience. So I got to see schools across the district. I was working initially on a project called the Business Service Centers, where essentially the idea was to decentralize a lot of the central office functions. So to create these service centers out in the field that could be one-stop shops for principals to call if they, had a problem with their roof, or, windows were broken, or they needed help with extra security. And so it was funny because this was sort of the first time, I think, in CPS history at that time that I was there, that the heads of the departments were meeting on a weekly basis to discuss, okay, well, how do we actually do this project? How do we help to open schools? And what that ended up turning into was opening up the first round of Renaissance 2010 schools. And so with that, it was an incredible education in terms of learning about the different types of schools there were, the different models of education, sort of where the problems were, what the different types of problems were on the business side, really, with CPS. And when I was there, I saw a lot of bad decisions being made. I saw decisions that I thought were corrupt. I saw decisions that were wasteful, these were decisions that they impact our children. And so when I was there, it was sort of right out of college, and I didn't feel like I had what I needed to be able to make actual change. So from there, I was at UIC for 5 years, and working in education policy, I kind of came to realize that there are so many factors that impact education in the city. So whether or not there's a grocery store, for example, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Whether or not there's a grocery store, what are the demographics of the city? How does housing policy affect that? Funnily enough, I worked with Jim Dispenza. He was the head of demographics back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember this was like not that long after Plan for Transformation, all the high rises had gone down. And so we're talking about these school buildings, along State Street, and the density of housing will never, ever be what it was. So we will never fill those schools the way they were. So we actually have to think differently about schools and our education policy. And you have to take into account so many other factors. So I wanted to understand that. And that's why I decided to go to the Harris School for Public Policy to really understand, how do you make great cities? What are the components of it? What do you need to really plan for? And while I was at Harris, we started doing work with the mayor of Gary, Indiana, through this partnership called the Gary Project, where policy students would go over to Gary and consult on issues that the mayor and her senior staff identified. And I chose the topic of abandoned buildings. It's an incredibly huge problem in Gary, and Gary is severely under-resourced. And I chose it because I figure, one, they are common to all cities. So this is pretty applicable whatever city I want to go work in. There will always be abandoned building issues. And two, if we can make a dent in this problem in Gary, actually make a dent, then you can really solve anything, because we're talking about giant problems and no resources. So really it is, how do you problem solve these things?
So would you consider yourself a Fioretti, Garcia, Wilson, or Emanuel supporter?
I think that they've all got, good ideas. They've all got strengths. I'm sure that, who agrees with all of them 100% of the time? Each of them has their strong points. Each of them have their weak points. I think that regardless of who is mayor, they've got to be able to work with the alderman, Mm-hmm. And if you're an alderman and you're saying, I am absolutely for this person, I'm absolutely for that person, what kind of, how are you going to work in the future, depending on, who becomes mayor? We don't know at this point. Mm-hmm. So why make those sort of declarations? You've got to be able to work with anybody,
So you have some really big macro issues that you're interested in the city: education, policy, schools, housing. If there's something in your ward, in the 5th Ward, that's specific that you think needs to be fixed, what would it be?
It's really interesting. So the 5th Ward is almost like a little Chicago. You have kind of the north part, Hyde Park, which is really well resourced. Schools are strong, safety and security is good. And then as soon as you get south of Hyde Park into Woodlawn, Greater Grand Crossing, and South Shore, people's concerns are totally different. And you're talking about, worrying about your kids getting shot on the street. You're worried about, where are you going to go get healthy food? Because it doesn't exist, And so those problems, the magnitude of those problems down there are pretty extreme. And so I would start there. I would start with revitalizing the South Shore area. We really need to make an entire ward that's safe and that has great schools. And so that would be my primary start.
So what is the University of Chicago's responsibility to your community? Do they need to be doing more to improve things in Woodlawn and Hyde Park?
I think some folks would argue that they're doing too much in Woodlawn right now.
Uh-huh.
It depends on your perspective. And I think the problem comes down to you have a really strong, wealthy, powerful voice, and then you have the community. And they're going to interact, over years, decades living together. But the problem is if the strong, powerful university always wins, then there's kind of an issue, and the community starts to resent that. So what are better ways that the university can work with the community? What I really feel like is we need some better leadership. We need a plan for the Fifth Ward. There isn't one with regards to education, with economic development. They're just with green space. And I don't understand how we can sort of move forward if we can't assess where we are right now and then make plans and build on that and then measure and see if we've made that growth. So what was the original question?
What is the University of Chicago owe
What
to
is
the
their
neighborhood?
responsibility?
What's their responsibility?
I think their responsibility is to be a good partner, a good steward. At UIC, what I love is that the University of Illinois at Chicago is committed to the city of Chicago. They're committed to urban education. This is in their mission statement. I think that's really powerful to say, you know what, we're a major university in an urban setting, and we're going to train our folks here to improve the neighborhoods. We're going to do, train our teachers to teach in CPS, not out in the suburbs. I think the University of Chicago may start looking to some of those models. It's really, the better they work with the community, the better their reputation is going to be. I mean, there are ways that we can do this that are going to benefit everybody.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, Jocelyn.
Thank you for having me.
You can learn more about the Jocelyn Hare campaign and almost 200 others by subscribing to our email newsletter at aldertrack.com, by listening to our series on Rivet Radio, and by subscribing to this series on YouTube. Thank you very much. More great stuff to come.